Silence is the warning most people notice too late. The most serious moment is not when an empath cries, argues, or becomes angry. Those reactions often mean they still care. They are still trying to repair the connection. They still believe their words can reach you. The real danger begins when they become calm. They stop asking questions. They stop explaining why your behavior hurts them. They stop waiting for apologies to become real change. Their voice becomes softer. Their replies become shorter, and the emotional struggle seems to disappear. You may believe the conflict is finally over, but the truth can be far more serious. Their patience has not simply ended. The hope that kept them emotionally connected is beginning to disappear. An empath can tolerate painful behavior for longer than many people expect because they rarely look at actions alone. They notice the fear behind anger, the insecurity behind control, and the old wounds behind emotional distance. Instead of judging quickly, they search for reasons. They remember the good moments. They consider what the other person may be facing privately. This deep understanding can make them patient, forgiving, and willing to offer one more chance. Yet it can also trap them in relationships where understanding is mistaken for permission. Empathy is powerful, but it is not endless. Every dismissed feeling leaves a small mark. Every broken promise weakens trust. Every apology without change teaches the empath that words are no longer reliable. One painful moment may be forgiven, but repeated patterns are stored in the mind and body. Over time, emotional stress can create exhaustion, numbness, and withdrawal. This is a lesser-known truth about highly empathetic people. Their deepest exhaustion does not always appear as sadness. It can appear as peace. But this peace may not mean healing has happened between two people. It may mean the empath has accepted that the relationship cannot be repaired by their effort alone. The word empath is not a clinical diagnosis. It is a popular term used for a person who is highly sensitive to the emotions and needs of others. In this video, you will learn how that sensitivity slowly changes under repeated disappointment. You will discover why anger can be a sign of remaining hope, why silence often comes after many failed conversations, and why an empath may leave emotionally before leaving physically. You will also learn why sudden apologies often arrive too late, what emotional detachment truly looks like, and how patience eventually turns into self-respect. Stay until the end, because the final stage is not cruelty, revenge, or hatred. It is a quiet internal decision that can permanently change how an empath sees another person. Once that decision is made, even love may no longer be enough to bring them back. Welcome to our channel where we explore empathy, boundaries, emotional strength, and hidden patterns in human behavior. Subscribe now and join us as we uncover the final stage of an empath's patience that almost nobody recognizes before it is too late. An empathetic person often stays longer than other people expect because they do not judge someone only by their worst behavior. When someone becomes cold, angry, distant, or unfair, the empath looks beneath the surface. They wonder what fear may be hiding behind that anger. They notice the insecurity behind controlling behavior. They recognize that emotional distance may come from old wounds. This ability to see pain behind harmful actions makes them slower to walk away. While others may focus on what happened, the empath also thinks about why it happened. They remember the person's difficult childhood, past betrayal, private struggles, and moments of vulnerability. They remember the kind person they met at the beginning. They hold on to the good memories and believe that the caring version of that person is still present somewhere beneath the defensive behavior. This does not mean the empath is weak or unable to recognize harm. In many cases, they understand exactly what is happening. The problem is that their understanding creates hope. They believe that patience may help the other person feel safe. They believe honest communication can remove confusion. They believe kindness may soften the parts of someone that have become hard. Because they can understand many sides of a situation, they often question their own reaction before questioning the other person's behavior. They wonder whether they are being too sensitive. They consider whether the person is simply having a difficult day. They give space when they need reassurance. They forgive words that continue hurting long after the argument ends. They lower their expectations because they know the other person is struggling. Each choice may look loving on its own, but together they can create a relationship in which only one person keeps adjusting. The empath becomes the listener, the peacemaker, and the person who carries the emotional weight. They carefully choose their words, wait for the right moment, and try to discuss problems without making the other person feel attacked. If the conversation fails, they often blame the timing, their tone, or their own inability to explain things clearly. Then they try again. Their patience grows from the belief that people can change when they feel understood. Sometimes that belief is rewarded. A sincere person may recognize their mistakes, accept responsibility, and make a real effort to change. In an unhealthy relationship, however, understanding can be mistaken for permission. The other person begins to assume that every hurtful action will be forgiven. They learn that apologies can replace accountability. They notice that the empath keeps returning after disappointment, so they stop taking the empath's boundaries seriously. What began as compassion slowly becomes a pattern of emotional imbalance. The empath offers understanding, but receives excuses. They offer patience, but receive repeated harm. They communicate clearly, but the other person only listens long enough to end the discomfort. This is where patience begins to work against the empath. Their best quality is used as a reason to demand even more from them. The other person may call them loving when they remain silent, but difficult when they finally speak. They may praise the empath's kindness while ignoring the emotional cost of that kindness. The empath notices these contradictions, yet still hopes that one honest conversation will create a turning point. They do not remain because they enjoy being mistreated. They remain because they can see what the relationship could become if both people finally cared with the same depth. That possibility keeps them present long after the reality has begun hurting them. An empath's breaking point is rarely created by one dramatic event. It usually develops through hundreds of smaller moments that appear harmless when viewed separately. One feeling is dismissed, one promise is broken, one important conversation is delayed. One apology is offered, but nothing changes afterward. Each event seems small enough to forgive, so the empath forgives it. They tell themselves that everyone makes mistakes. They do not want to destroy a meaningful connection because of one careless comment or one disappointing evening. The difficulty is that the same moments keep returning in different forms. The words may change, but the emotional result remains the same. The empath speaks about feeling ignored, and the other person becomes defensive. They ask for consistency and receive another promise. They explain what hurt them, and the conversation turns into an argument about their reaction. Instead of addressing the original pain, the other person focuses on the empath's tone, timing, or choice of words. The empath leaves the conversation feeling guilty for raising the issue at all. They may receive an apology later, but the apology is used to reset the relationship rather than repair it. For a short time, everything improves, attention returns, affection becomes stronger, communication feels easier. Then the old pattern slowly comes back. This cycle confuses the empath because each period of improvement revives hope. They begin to believe that change is finally happening, only to discover that the change lasted until the risk of losing them had passed. Meanwhile, the damage continues to build beneath their forgiveness. The conscious mind may decide to move forward, but the nervous system still responds to repeated stress. The empath becomes more alert to changes in tone. They notice delays, emotional distance, and small signs of another conflict. They start preparing for disappointment before it arrives. A message that once brought happiness now creates uncertainty. A quiet evening no longer feels peaceful because they are waiting for the next emotional shift. Their body may feel tense even when no argument is happening. This does not mean every physical or emotional reaction has one simple cause, but repeated relational stress can leave a person feeling tired, guarded, and unable to relax. The empath may not immediately connect this exhaustion to the relationship. They may think they need more sleep, better discipline, or more control over their emotions. They keep searching for ways to become easier to love. At the same time, support is rarely returned with the same care. When the other person is upset, the empath listens closely. They ask questions, offer comfort, and remember details. When the empath needs support, the conversation may quickly return to the other person. Their feelings are minimized, compared, corrected, or treated as an inconvenience. This lack of emotional balance becomes another quiet wound. The empath does not demand perfection. They simply want evidence that their inner world matters too. When that evidence repeatedly fails to appear, loneliness enters the relationship. This form of loneliness can be more painful than being alone because the empath is emotionally present with someone who is not truly present with them. They keep giving, hoping their example will teach the other person how to give back. Instead, their effort becomes expected. The relationship begins depending on their ability to absorb discomfort without creating consequences. Every forgiven event strengthens that expectation. The other person sees that the empath stayed but may not see what staying cost them. They do not see the private tears, the sleepless thoughts, or the slow loss of emotional safety. They only see that the relationship continued, so they assume the damage was not serious. Yet forgiveness does not erase a pattern. The empath may release anger after each event, but their trust becomes thinner, their warmth becomes harder to access, their belief in the relationship weakens in small amounts. There is no single moment they can point to and call the end. There is only a growing collection of evidence that begins speaking louder than every promise. Losing patience and losing hope are not the same thing. Patience can disappear for a moment and return after rest, reassurance, or honest repair. Hope is different. Hope is the inner belief that effort still has a purpose. As long as an empath continues arguing, asking questions, and explaining their feelings, some part of them still believes the relationship can improve. Their frustration may sound intense, but it often contains a hidden request. They want the other person to understand. They want their pain to matter. They want to see proof that the relationship is important enough to protect. Anger in this stage is not always rejection. It can be the final energy of emotional involvement. The empath is still investing thought, time, and emotion into the possibility of change. They are still trying to reach the person rather than remove themselves from the person. This is why treating every emotional reaction as unnecessary drama can be a serious mistake. The empath may not be trying to create conflict. They may be trying to prevent emotional distance from becoming permanent. Every difficult conversation is an attempt to keep the connection alive. But when those conversations repeatedly produce defensiveness, blame, denial, or temporary promises, hope begins to weaken. The empath slowly realizes that better wording will not create responsibility in someone who does not want to accept it. They understand that explaining the same wound in 10 different ways will not matter if the other person benefits from pretending not to understand. This realization is painful because it removes the belief that one more conversation can fix everything. The empath begins to compare words with behavior. They stop giving promises the same emotional value. They watch what happens after the apology. They notice whether effort continues when there is no immediate threat of separation. They pay attention to consistency during ordinary days, not only affection during a crisis. This shift changes how they see the relationship. In the past, they focused on potential. Now they focus on patterns. Potential shows who someone could become. Patterns reveal who that person is repeatedly choosing to be. The empath may still understand the reasons behind the behavior, but those reasons no longer erase its effects. They begin to recognize that pain can explain an action without making the action acceptable. A difficult past may deserve compassion, but it does not give someone unlimited permission to create a difficult present for others. As this truth settles in, the empath becomes less interested in explanations. They have already heard why the person behaves this way. What they need now is evidence of change. Without that evidence, their emotional investment starts decreasing. This distance may be so gradual that the other person does not notice it. The empath still completes daily responsibilities. They may still speak kindly, offer help, and avoid unnecessary conflict. On the outside, very little appears different. Inside, however, they are no longer building the same future. They stop making plans based on promises. They stop depending on the other person for emotional safety. They begin solving problems alone because asking for support has become another source of disappointment. They share fewer private thoughts. They no longer bring every fear, dream, or concern into the relationship. This is not always a planned punishment. It is often an automatic form of protection. People naturally become careful with places that have repeatedly failed to hold their vulnerability safely. The empath still feels, but they stop placing those feelings in hands that have treated them carelessly. The other person may enjoy the new quietness because there are fewer difficult conversations. They may think the empath has finally accepted the situation. In one sense, they have, but they are not accepting the behavior as healthy. They are accepting that the person may not change. That acceptance removes the reason to keep fighting. Emotional distance begins in the space where hope once lived. The empath does not suddenly stop caring. They slowly stop believing that their care can save a connection that requires effort from two people. By the time an empath stops explaining their pain, they have usually explained it many times. They may have spoken gently because they did not want the other person to feel blamed. They may have chosen careful examples, described specific situations, and explained what kind of change would help. They may have waited until both people were calm. They may have written messages because spoken conversations became too emotional. They may have reduced a complicated wound to one simple request. The lack of change is rarely caused by a complete lack of information. More often, the empath reaches a point where they realize that the other person knows what hurts them but does not treat that knowledge as important enough to guide their behavior. This realization changes silence from fear into protection. Earlier, the empath may have remained quiet to avoid conflict. Now they remain quiet because conflict no longer promises a useful result. They understand the familiar sequence. They mention the problem. The other person becomes defensive. The original issue disappears beneath arguments about intention. The empath is told that the harm was not meant, so they should not feel hurt. They are asked to prove every detail. Their emotional experience becomes a courtroom where they must provide enough evidence to deserve care. By the end, they are exhausted, confused, and sometimes apologizing for the conversation. Repeating this cycle teaches them that speaking can create more pain than remaining silent. Their silence is then misunderstood as manipulation, coldness, or an attempt to gain control. Yet emotional exhaustion often looks quiet from the outside. A person who has spent a long time trying to be heard may eventually conserve the little energy that remains. The empath's replies become shorter because long explanations feel useless. Their reactions become smaller because strong reactions have been used against them. They stop asking questions because the answers rarely match the behavior that follows. They no longer seek reassurance because reassurance without consistency has lost its meaning. This is not the silence of someone waiting to be chased. It is the silence of someone learning not to place their peace inside another person's choices. The shift may appear sudden to the person who ignored the earlier warnings, but it does not feel sudden to the empath. They remember every attempt. They remember the conversations that ended without repair. They remember being promised change only after reaching a breaking point. They remember being called too sensitive when they asked for basic consideration. Their silence contains a history that the other person may have chosen not to notice. At this stage, the empath also begins speaking differently to themselves. They stop asking, "How can I make this person understand me?" and begin asking, "Why must I keep proving that my pain matters?" That question moves their attention away from changing the other person and toward protecting themselves. They begin to notice how much energy has been spent managing someone else's emotions. They see how often they ignored their own discomfort to keep the relationship calm. They recognize that peace created through self-silencing is not real peace. It is only the absence of visible conflict. Beneath it, resentment, grief, and exhaustion continue growing. The empath may become more private during this time. They think deeply before responding. They no longer reveal every realization because they understand that not every truth needs to become another debate. They may start making decisions without announcing them. They create emotional space. They return to neglected interests, friendships, responsibilities, or parts of their identity that became smaller inside the relationship. Their energy slowly moves away from explaining pain and toward rebuilding stability. The other person may sense this change and demand communication, but the empath no longer believes communication means repeating the same words to someone who has already heard them. Real communication requires listening, responsibility, and action. Without those things, another conversation is simply another place where the empath is asked to spend energy they no longer have. The final stage of an empath's patience is not an explosion. It is emotional detachment. This does not mean all feelings disappear at once. The empath may still love the person. They may remember good moments and feel sadness about what the relationship could have become. They may still care about the other person's well-being. What changes is the power those feelings have over their choices. For a long time, love may have convinced them to remain hopeful. Compassion may have persuaded them to excuse repeated behavior. Guilt may have pulled them back whenever they tried to create distance. In the final stage, those emotions no longer control the direction of their life. The empath accepts what they previously fought against. They accept that the person may never change. They accept that love cannot repair someone who refuses responsibility. They accept that understanding harmful behavior does not require tolerating it. They accept that protecting themselves does not make them cruel. This acceptance is painful, but it is also clear. It removes the confusion created by constantly comparing promises with reality. The empath no longer needs to decide which version of the person is real. They understand that kind moments and harmful patterns can exist in the same individual. A person can express love and still behave in ways that make a relationship unsafe or emotionally exhausting. Recognizing this complexity allows the empath to stop using occasional affection as proof that the entire pattern will improve. Emotional detachment begins when they stop negotiating with the evidence. They no longer build hope around rare moments of effort. They look at the full pattern and allow it to guide them. This stage can feel unfamiliar because the empath has spent so much time reacting to the other person. Their mood once changed with every message, apology, withdrawal, or promise. Now those things create less movement inside them. The other person may become distant, but the empath does not chase. They may become affectionate, but the empath does not immediately forget the past. They may offer another explanation, but the empath does not rush to defend or comfort them. The emotional system that once remained highly alert begins stepping back. The empath realizes that they do not need revenge. Revenge would keep them emotionally tied to the person. They do not need to make the other person feel exactly what they felt. They no longer need a perfect apology because they understand that an apology cannot return the time, trust, or energy already lost. They do not need one final conversation to prove who was right. Their experience remains real even if the other person never validates it. This is one of the deepest changes in the final stage. The empath stops requiring agreement before honoring their own reality. Earlier, they may have believed closure would arrive through the other person's honesty. Now they understand that closure can begin with their own acceptance. They know what they experienced. They know how often they tried. They know what remaining in the pattern was doing to them. That knowledge becomes enough to make a decision. Emotional detachment is not the same as emotional numbness. Numbness can be a temporary response to overwhelming stress, while healthy detachment creates room for clear choices and boundaries. The empath may move between sadness, relief, guilt, and calm as they release the relationship. There may still be difficult days. A memory can still hurt. A sincere apology can still create doubt. Detachment does not make a person free from emotion. It means emotion no longer automatically leads them back into the same cycle. They can care and still say no. They can forgive and still remain distant. They can understand and still decide that access to their life must end. The emotional bond begins releasing them when they stop confusing compassion with responsibility. They are responsible for their choices, not for saving another adult from every consequence of theirs. This truth gives the empath permission to stop carrying a relationship that has been resting almost entirely on their patience. The empath's calmness is easily misunderstood because many people measure the seriousness of a problem by the amount of visible emotion surrounding it. Crying appears serious. Anger appears serious. Repeated questions appear serious. Quietness can look like improvement. When the empath stops complaining, the other person may believe the conflict has ended. They may feel relieved that difficult conversations are no longer happening. They may assume the empath has finally accepted their explanation or forgotten what occurred. What they fail to understand is that the absence of protest may signal the absence of hope. Earlier, the empath raised problems because they wanted to repair the relationship. Every complaint contained emotional investment. Every question showed that the answer still mattered. Every attempt to explain pain revealed a desire to be known and understood. When those efforts stop, the relationship may become easier on the surface while becoming weaker underneath. There are fewer arguments because the empath is no longer fighting for a different future. There are fewer demands because they are no longer expecting the other person to meet them. There is less jealousy, fear, or urgency because their emotional dependence is fading. The person who benefited from the empath's patience may mistake this calmness for victory. They may believe the empath has become more cooperative. In reality, the empath may simply be withdrawing their heart from a situation their body has not yet left. This calmness is dangerous to a broken connection because there is less left to negotiate. A person can respond to anger with an apology. They can answer questions with promises. They can calm fear with temporary affection. Detachment does not react as easily to those methods. The empath has heard the words before. They know that a strong emotional moment can make the other person attentive for a short time. What they no longer trust is whether that attention will remain after the crisis passes. Their calmness comes from recognizing the cycle before it completes itself again. They do not need to wait for the next disappointment to understand where the pattern leads. This gives their behavior a quiet certainty. They may become polite, respectful, and practical. They handle necessary conversations without opening emotional doors. They stop sharing information that creates vulnerability. They no longer search the other person's face for reassurance. They begin making peace with outcomes they once feared. The possibility of being alone becomes less frightening than the certainty of remaining emotionally lonely. The possibility of ending the relationship becomes less painful than repeating its current form. This inner comparison changes everything. The empath is no longer choosing between the relationship and emptiness. They are choosing between a familiar pattern and the chance to rebuild themselves. By the time the other person notices, much of that rebuilding may already have begun. The empath may have developed routines that do not depend on them. They may have returned to friends, goals, or interests that were neglected. They may have imagined a future in which peace is not interrupted by the same emotional cycle. Leaving emotionally often happens before leaving physically because the mind needs time to release what the heart once valued. The empath quietly grieves the future they expected. They release plans, hopes, and versions of the relationship that never became real. This private grieving may make them appear unusually calm when a visible ending finally occurs. The other person sees only the final decision and believes it was made without emotion. They do not see that the emotion was spent over months or years. They did not witness every private moment when the empath questioned whether to stay. They may call the departure sudden because they were present for the relationship but absent from the empath's emotional experience. Calmness is therefore not proof that nothing matters. Sometimes it is what remains after a person has felt the same pain so many times that they no longer need to react to understand it. When the other person begins sensing the empath's emotional distance, their behavior may suddenly change. They become more attentive. They ask what is wrong after ignoring earlier answers. They offer affection that has been missing. They remember promises that were forgotten when the empath still felt secure enough to stay. This sudden effort can be confusing because it resembles the change the empath requested for so long. Part of them may feel relieved. Another part may wonder why their pain was not enough to inspire change, but the possibility of losing access to them was. This question becomes difficult to ignore. The empath starts examining the timing of the new behavior. They notice that effort appears when consequences become real. The other person may promise to communicate better, become more responsible, or finally seek help. Those promises may even be sincere in the moment. Fear can make a person genuinely believe they will change. But sincerity during a crisis is not the same as consistency after it. The empath has learned this through experience. They no longer measure change by the intensity of an apology. They measure it by repeated behavior over time. One emotional conversation cannot repair months of neglect. One kind message cannot restore trust that was weakened by countless dismissals. A few peaceful days cannot prove that a harmful pattern has ended. Trust returns slowly because trust is not created by words alone. It grows when actions become reliable, especially after urgency disappears. The empath now watches what happens when the other person feels comfortable again. Do they continue listening when separation is no longer being discussed? Do they respect boundaries when those boundaries are inconvenient? Do they take responsibility without requiring the empath to explain every detail again? Do they repair harm without turning the conversation toward their own discomfort? These questions protect the empath from being pulled back by a powerful moment. In the past, they may have focused on intention. Now they focus on impact and repetition. They understand that someone can intend to do better and still remain unwilling to complete the work that better behavior requires. Caring about change is not the same as practicing it. Promising change is not the same as accepting the discomfort that comes with it. The empath may still feel compassion for the person's fear. They may see genuine sadness and understand that the threat of loss has awakened feelings the other person avoided. But compassion no longer forces them to restart the relationship. They recognize that another person's pain does not automatically create an obligation to abandon their own boundary. This is a major change for someone who once felt responsible for easing every difficult emotion around them. The empath can now remain present with another person's disappointment without treating that disappointment as proof that their decision is wrong. They may say less because there is little left to explain. They may refuse to debate their boundary. They may allow the other person to hold a different version of the story. Earlier, being misunderstood felt unbearable. Now, returning to the same cycle feels worse. The other person may increase their promises when the first ones fail to create a response. They may speak about memories, future plans, or the special nature of the connection. These words can touch the empath without controlling them. The empath does not need to deny that good moments existed. They simply understand that good memories cannot carry a relationship in which present behavior continues causing harm. They may still love the person, but love is no longer the only factor in the decision. Respect, safety, consistency, and mutual effort now matter equally. Caring becomes one piece of the truth rather than the entire truth. This allows the empath to make a decision that may feel painful, but still protects their well-being. Promises lose their power because the empath no longer falls in love with what could happen. They respond to what has happened repeatedly and what is being demonstrated now. Choosing self-respect does not mean the empath's kindness has died. It means they are no longer willing to prove their kindness by abandoning themselves. For a long time, they may have measured love by how much they could endure. They believed loyalty meant staying through every difficulty. They believed patience meant giving another chance whenever someone appeared sorry. They believed compassion required them to carry pain that did not belong to them. These beliefs made them generous, but they also made it difficult to recognize when generosity had become self-neglect. The final stage teaches them that love without boundaries can slowly remove the person who is giving it. Their needs become smaller, their voice becomes quieter, their life begins revolving around another person's moods, wounds, and choices. Choosing self-respect reverses this process. The empath begins taking their own feelings as seriously as they take everyone else's. They stop treating exhaustion as a small price for maintaining connection. They stop calling constant anxiety love. They stop confusing emotional intensity with emotional closeness. A relationship can feel powerful and still be unhealthy. A bond can feel deep and still lack mutual respect. The empath learns to judge a connection not only by how strongly they feel, but also by how safely they can exist inside it. This changes the role of boundaries. Boundaries are no longer threats designed to control another person. They become clear statements about what the empath will accept, what they will participate in, and what they will do when harmful behavior continues. A boundary does not force someone else to change. It allows the empath to decide how they will respond if change does not happen. This difference gives them power without requiring conflict. They do not need to convince the other person that the boundary is reasonable. They need to honor it consistently. At first, this can create guilt. The empath is familiar with feeling other people's disappointment, and that disappointment may feel like proof that they are causing harm. They must learn that disappointing someone is not always the same as mistreating them. Saying no can upset a person who benefited from constant access, but their discomfort does not make the boundary cruel. Distance can feel painful to someone who expected endless forgiveness, but pain does not automatically make the decision wrong. The empath begins separating responsibility from guilt. They take responsibility for speaking honestly and acting with care. They stop taking responsibility for every reaction their honesty creates. This allows their kindness to become healthier. Instead of rescuing, they support when support is appropriate. Instead of carrying everyone, they allow capable adults to carry the consequences of their choices. Instead of answering every emotional demand immediately, they pause and ask whether they have the energy, desire, and responsibility to respond. Their patience becomes selective. They still understand human weakness, but they no longer use that understanding to excuse repeated disrespect. They still forgive, but forgiveness does not always include renewed access. They still care, but caring no longer requires constant closeness. Their heart remains soft while the door to it gains conditions. Honesty must enter, respect must enter, consistency must enter, accountability must enter. Words without behavior are left outside. This new way of living may surprise people who only knew the empath through their lack of boundaries. Some may accuse them of changing. In a way, they have changed. They have stopped offering unlimited access to people who provide limited care. They have stopped making themselves smaller so others can avoid responsibility. They have stopped waiting for external permission to protect their peace. Yet the deepest part of them remains the same. They are still sensitive. They still notice pain. They still want to help. The difference is that they now include themselves among the people worthy of their compassion. Their empathy is no longer a resource everyone else can use while they remain empty. It becomes a conscious gift offered where it is respected and withdrawn where it is repeatedly exploited. This is how self-respect enters the empath's life, quietly, firmly, and without the need to punish anyone. The final stage of an empath's patience is rarely loud. There may be no final argument, dramatic goodbye, or demand for one last apology. The real ending happens quietly inside them. They stop waiting for another person to recognize their worth because they have finally learned to recognize it themselves. They understand that kindness should not require self-abandonment. Love should not demand endless suffering. And understanding someone's wounds does not mean accepting the pain those wounds continue to cause. Their silence is not revenge, it is acceptance. Their distance is not cruelty. It is protection. They may still care, but they no longer allow that care to control every decision. Their heart remains soft, yet access to it is no longer unlimited. If one of these stages felt familiar, tell us which one in the comments. Your experience may help another person realize that they are not alone. Like this video if it gave you clarity, and share it with someone who keeps giving chances to people who never value them. Subscribe to the channel for more deep and honest videos about empathy, boundaries, emotional strength, self-respect, and hidden patterns in human behavior. Turn on notifications so you do not miss what comes next. And remember, when an empath finally stops explaining, they have not run out of words. They have run out of reasons to keep giving those words to someone who never listened.